Welcome to Exploring Boys Education, a monthly podcast produced by the International Boys Schools Coalition. I'm Bruce Collins. In December 2021, I spoke with Andrew Cowie about sustaining staff and faculty well-being in schools. Cowie offered advice for school leaders and teachers as they strive to create positive school cultures that value well-being. As a follow-up to that conversation, our focus for this Exploring Boys Schools feature is enhancing boys' well-being. In her March 2021 Edutopia article, Laura McKenna asks an important question. Are we facing a mental health crisis for boys? McKenna cites increased rates of depression for boys, with a higher percentage of teenage boys reporting anxiety and depression as major problems. McKenna writes, psychologists and educators point to increasing pressures to succeed in school and a growing reliance on technology that can leave kids feeling isolated and vulnerable, a situation exacerbated by COVID-19. According to experts, boys can struggle more than girls because they have fewer tools to cope with emotions and stresses, and they are less likely to get the help they need. It's not hopeless, however. School cultures that destigmatize mental health issues and create safe and brave opportunities for boys to engage with their inner selves and provide support from adults who understand their needs are priceless. So many of our member schools are doing wonderful work in this regard, and I'm grateful to Upper Canada College colleagues, Scott Cowie, who is the Dean of Student Life and Wellbeing, and Laurie Fraser, Coordinator of Student Wellbeing Programs, for sharing with us their school's commitment to enhancing boys' wellbeing. Before we speak with Scott and Laurie, however, it's time to hand over to Amy Ahart, IBSC's Interim Executive Director, for the IBSC Newsreel.
Thank you, Bruce, and hello, listeners. In this newsreel, I'd like to highlight the first in our Research in Boys School series, which is available on demand from February 15th to 18th on our IBSC Shorts platform. St. Christopher's School in the United States will be sharing about their outstanding school-based research fellows program. Heads of member schools in South Africa can sign up now for an IBSC Ideas Lab designed specifically for heads of school and principals. And there's still spots open in our Ideas Lab for teachers of color and boys schools, which starts on February 17th. We are so excited for the 2022 IBSC Annual Conference. Join us in person from June 26th to 29th at St. Mark's School of Texas. We recently announced 3 of our headline speakers, David Brooks, Julie Lithcott-Hames, and Alan Stern. No matter where you come from, our goal is the same, guiding boys along the path to manhood. We hope to see you in Dallas as we forge our next steps together. For more information about the 2022 IBSC Annual Conference and our other programs, visit our website at www.theibsc.org and register today. Bruce, I'm looking forward to your conversation with Scott Cowie and Laurie Fraser from Upper Canada College as they share how they endeavor to enhance the well-being of the boys in their care. Scott and Laurie, thank you for joining us. Bruce, back to you.
Laurie and Scott, welcome to Exploring Boys Education, and thank you so much for sharing your insights on this very important topic. One of our favorite things to do on the podcast is to explore what member schools around the world are doing to best serve the boys in their communities. And so by way of introduction, before we dive into the importance of enhancing boys' well-being in boys' schools, why don't we start by telling our listeners a little bit about Upper Canada College, which is the school you are from, and what roles each of you fulfill at your wonderful school. Scott, let's start with you, and then we'll pop over to Laurie.
Sure, and thank you, Bruce. Just a little bit about our school. So Upper Canada College is one of Canada's oldest schools and was established in 1829. We are a senior kindergarten to grade 12 independent urban boys school in the heart of Toronto, one of North America's 5 largest cities. And we have a student population of roughly 1,240 with approximately 90 boarders from year 8 to year 12. We are an international baccalaureate continuum school offering the primary years, middle years, and diploma program to all students. Just a little bit about my role as the Dean of Student Life and Wellbeing. I have oversight of all co-curricular programming, SK to 12. The arts programming, clubs, athletics, service, internationalism, really any learning in the student experience that takes place outside of the classroom would fall under my purview. Fortunately, I have a great team of people with whom I work that operationalize all of that programming. But the other part of my role, the one we're here to discuss today, obviously, is it sees me responsible for developing an intentional approach to supporting student well-being. Something I know, again, we'll be speaking of in detail throughout this. But while I would say that the student life part of my portfolio is the largest aspect, I think many would argue that the well-being part is the most urgent, certainly during this particular challenging time. So I'll maybe leave it with that, and then over to Laurie.
Thank you. Hi, it's really a pleasure to speak with you, Bruce. My title is Coordinator, Student Wellbeing Programs, and it's a great fit for me because really my role is around collaborating all the time with colleagues and with students just to continue developing wellbeing programming throughout the school, SK to 12. I also get to stay really current on wellbeing research and what's happening out there in the world. And I get to do a bit of writing, which I love to do. So it's a really exciting time to be doing this work.
And I think an important time to be doing this work, as Scott mentioned. And before we started recording, Laurie, we were talking about the impact of the pandemic on children and teenagers' well-being. And so I'm grateful for this conversation too. Scott, I'd like to start this conversation about enhancing boys' well-being by diving in at a strategy level. And I understand that well-being is an anchor point for Upper Canada College's strategic direction. I'm really fascinated to hear about that and how this has impacted your school's commitment to well-being. How has this strategic intent translated into action?
Well-being features prominently in our strategic directions and in the development of those strategic directions a number of years ago. We went through an extensive consultation process with every aspect and stakeholder in our community, current parents, alumni, and students, employees, just everybody, and really well-being came out as a very recognizable and leading area or topic that consultation identified as being critical for us. So it features prominently in our strategic directions, both as a standalone pillar, one of our 9 pillars, and also one of our 5 core values. And I would say, just to answer your question, I would say one of the most evident ways to demonstrate our commitment to well-being was really the roles that Laurie and I just spoke of. This appointment of the Dean of Student Life and Wellbeing role and Laurie's role as coordinator of student wellbeing programming were really part of the vision and strategy of our principal. Firmly believe that you have to resource what you as an institution value, and my role and Laurie's role were critical to that. How has the strategic intention translated into action? Well, we're really, pleased to report, and we can't report on everything, but our approach to well-being is one that targets all community constituents. Our students through our advisory programming that we can touch on a little later, our employee programming as well, and our well-being committee that has been established and set up for our employees. With our parents, we have a speaker series. It was actually funded by an alumni, our Casey Fellowship, it's called. And also our volunteer associations with alumni, current parents. They actually developed a program through their work for our grads, our grad success mentorship program. So we really see that our focus on well-being over the past 3 or 4 years has brought the community together around the idea of how critical it is to support all members of our community. And we've managed to implement programming to that effect.
I love how you frame that the school sort of this plays this core role in every stakeholder's understanding of well-being. Scott, Laurie, I'm interested to hear from you in your experience. Why is it important, or why has it been important for Upper Canada College, especially in this moment? And why might it be important for other boys' schools to have this intentional focus on the well-being of their students?
Thanks, Bruce. Well, I think, we identified it as a need intentionally prior to the pandemic, but I think everyone around the world has experienced sort of the obvious reason why well-being needs to be a focus in our lives to try and navigate these last 2 years and manage our health and support our health and our well-being. So teaching skills and habits to youth seems like an obvious choice. But then, especially through this last 2 years, wow, what a challenging time for teenagers and young people across the board. For boys in particular, I think it's really important to give space and time for boys and non-binary youth, I would say, to explore concepts of masculinity and identify these sort of outdated stereotypes of what it is to be a boy or a man, and allow them to shed some of those restrictions and those, parts of themselves that sometimes they start to shut down as they get older. And so, our advising program for sure can give space to that, and not just conversations, but activities and experiences, and then, practices to learn more about themselves. And I think even on a deeper level, what we're seeing now is the connection between well-being and our pluralism work. For these students, it's really important, I think, to connect themselves also with the greater world that they live in, and how to have, healthy relationships in that space. We have a pluralism strategy, and we're looking for connections between well-being and pluralism, and diversity, equity, and inclusion piece. The more we know ourselves, the better we can be in the world around us. And I heard someone say the other day, self-awareness is the pathway to inclusion. So, it's an important piece.
Yeah, and I suppose with boys being or spending so much of their time on our campuses too, we have such a wonderful opportunity to have an impact on their health and well-being. Scott, I was interested to learn that UCC speaks about both responsive and proactive support. I love the way you've developed that sort of viewpoint when it comes to the well-being of boys. How do you define those terms, the proactive and responsive supports, and how do they guide your support of boys?
We all understand that there will be some people, individuals in society, who require specialized expertise for support. In one or more points in our lives, we all will. And so with respect to our responsive supports for students, they're really centered around our student health services and in that area. We know that, physically, if you sprain your ankle or whatnot, have some type of physical injury, you're going to need that the specialized medical support to treat that. So we're fully aware that that's a part of our approach to well-being, and has to be. So indeed, one of the first decisions made in the area of our responsive supports was to hire a school psychologist to ensure our supports had access to a high level of expertise and support of their social and emotional well-being. So the hiring of our psychologist complemented, our existing counselors at the upper school and at the prep. So that's been an integral part of our responsive approach. And, we're very blessed to have the type of resources to be able to, develop and build a health center that way. We also did an extensive review of our health center staffing model, out of which we were able to designate some leadership in that area. Again, it speaks to that notion of really resourcing what you value. So, that person ensures that our responsive supports are best meeting the needs of students within our existing well-being systems and structures. And we've also devoted focus and funding, and a lot of it is donor funding, thankfully, to ensure our health center staff are provided with professional development to best meet the needs of students who may require this specialized support. So we've had employees have been trained in suicide prevention training programs like Assist and Safe Talk, which I think globally would be recognized. And actually, thanks to some donor funding this past August, all of our employees went through a certified course in mental health and first aid. So it's been a real focus for us. That's our responsive approach. With respect to our proactive approach to well-being, it's really our pastoral care, system and structure, which is the primary way through which we deliver this type of intentional programming. So, in support of this, and this is really where Laurie leads us at both the upper and preparatory schools. We restructured our advising system recently, where we hired 5-year level coordinators. We didn't have that structure. I know many schools do. But again, to ensure that leadership at each grade level. And we've also overhauled the composition of our student advising groups, which provide for year level specific groups now, so that we can allow for age specific well-being content to be delivered to the students. And I would just say, one of the great things that Laurie has done is just partnered with outside organizations in the space of well-being programming to deliver some of this to our students. Again, we've got the advisory structure for that. And a real focus for us this year has been working with our younger students, our preparatory students. In fact, we're Laurie and I just yesterday were in the working with our year 7 students to deliver a program of self-discovery and belonging for those students. So those are some of the ways that we target what we would describe as the proactive approach to well-being.
I know we're talking a lot about the strategy, but I think it's really important and it's fascinating to hear you speak about this. And I know you've also developed a framework for well-being, which seems to me, as an outside observer, a very useful structure for underpinning the support of boys. And I wanted to ask you, how does this framework aim to inspire each boy to make a lasting impact on his world?
Sure, and thank you. You've quoted the last sort of part of our mission statement there, and it's something we developed as part of our strategic directions. If you don't mind, I'll just read the whole one, because that actually helps in addressing what you've asked. And that is, Upper Canada College provides transformational learning experiences that foster the development of head, heart, and humanity, and inspire each boy to make a lasting and positive impact on his world. And really, it was one of our first tasks as a well-being team was to develop a framework for well-being, so that we did have, as much as we could, a common community understanding of what we mean when we speak of well-being. Bruce, in my experience, many schools define their approach to well-being through the initiatives they run. So, you ask, hey, what's your approach to well-being? Well, we have a Well-Being Wednesday initiative, or we run mindfulness sessions. And I'm not knocking those by any means. Indeed, we have them ourselves, and we call them Well-Being Wednesdays and whatnot. However, it was our intent to develop a framework based on aspects of our lives as individuals in this world that extensive research and psychology demonstrate and have much evidence based as being directly related to an individual's level of well-being. Thus, we landed on 10 dimensions, and those dimensions are perspective, growth mindset, accomplishment, positive emotion, relationships, resilience, meaning, other-mindedness, engagement, and underpinned by vitality. And these 10 dimensions in our framework are organized across the 3 domains that are mentioned in our mission statement, and that's head, heart, and humanity. So we feel that if students have an understanding of what it is that in their lives and experiences that they may have, or strengths, if they have an understanding of what impacts their well-being, they'll be able to better answer, the 3 key questions that really guide a lot of what we do any school does, I think, with their work with youth, is, and those questions are: who am I? How do I belong? And what impact can I make? And we feel that knowing the answers to these questions, and even having a guide through the framework that we developed, will help them flourish and hopefully help them to make a positive difference in their worlds.
Scott, you alluded to the fact that it's so important to have a shared understanding as a community of well-being, and what would that shared understanding be for Upper Canada College?
Well, Bruce, I'd like to say that that every member of our community can cite or quote all of the 10 dimensions that we have, or even the domains
I can.
within our framework. Oh, yes, I know you. Those certainly, in the direct work can, and you're right, Laurie. However, I think it would be naive to think that. I will say this, though, that it's been interesting to see, and Laurie, I think you would validate this. It's been interesting to see the growth in understanding, even by the use of these terms now and the use of these dimensions by various members of our community. Students are talking about resilience, and they're talking about trying to find meaning and growth mindset and things like that. So it does seem to be that our framework is having an impact and is starting to take hold. I mean, we've also been strategic about that. We had, one of our quarterly communications, publications from communications was focused on well-being and actually included our framework and was organized by that, where there were stories about perspective, stories about relationships, and how that impacted our community. I'll say, just in closing to this response, another piece is working with our parent organizations and working with our volunteer groups, and that's a way to explicitly have our common understanding of well-being out there through these dimensions, so that the parent organization now, in when they're thinking about bringing in speakers or whatnot, will have a look at our framework and say, okay, what area of well-being or what dimension is going to be fulfilled or met, through this, through this, having the speaker here. So we really try to use it, and we'll continue to use it as a guide for much of our programming across all constituents.
Yeah. Laurie, it's wonderful to have a great strategic focus on well-being, and Scott has outlined UCC so wonderfully. And it's great to have a framework that supports the strategic focus. But I suppose the crux of any good idea in a boys' school is the student's experience. And I really am excited for you to share how well-being is brought to life for boys at Upper Canada College. And I know that's your sort of key area of focus.
Yeah, it's so exciting and hard sometimes, but I think to Scott's point, as far as a shared understanding of well-being, it can be tricky because well-being can feel really subjective, and yet we know there's so many evidence-based ways, approaches, ways to make it happen that are proven to be effective and helpful and good. So we're working with colleagues. And driving those dimensions forward is a really wonderful part of my work. So I think, the starting point is our house system. We have a house system here that has been proven, even through our student surveys, to be a huge support of our students' sense of belonging and well-being. Those peer relationships, and a house would be integrated, from students grade 8 through grade 12, and at our preparatory school, SK to grade 7. And within that house system, that's where our advising program lives. And so it'll be students within that house in a grade level grouping for advising. And each grade level of advising has a couple of those dimensions from our framework driving the focus of what they're going to experience that year. And they were really we put a lot of thought into which particular dimensions would land really well for that student, the experience they're having at that grade level. What are they going through socially, emotionally? What are the academic demands of the IB program for them at that time? And physiologically, what's happening in their brain and their body, and what might they need, to be exploring So that was really exciting to line that up. And so, it's been a challenging 2 years to launch this new program and try and get those dimensions as the focus of their time in advising. And yet it's probably been the perfect time because it's never been more needed, or more obviously needed, maybe, for this kind of work to be happening. So it starts with advising and those grade level experiences and dimensions. But then it goes beyond that, right? So what we found has been really helpful is when we connect those grade level experiences with other areas of student support. The health center, when our psychologist comes in, or our counselor, to do special conversations with the students around mental health, or our university counseling department with our older students, because that really matters to them. So you can talk well-being all you want, but if you remain in this silo, it's not really going to be meeting the students where they're at. And then, of course, through our co-curriculars. And a huge component is our service work, helping them find meaning and purpose, and taking action in that space is also really important. So in general, so the overall student experience.
Yeah. I think a key point, Laurie, is for people who are going to be listening to this is, having listened to how this focus on well-being has been implemented at UCC, I think it's key for us to understand what you've learnt in the process. What might be helpful to listeners as they consider their own initiatives. What advice do you have for those who are listening?
Well, I think what we've learned, and Scott kind of mentioned this in his conversation too, in the earlier question about, connecting with parents and connecting with employees and connecting with students, that it's really about casting a web that is authentic, as opposed to trying to project something onto, and giving space for initiatives or discussion or experiences to come through. It's about connections and collaboration. And, giving students voice because they know what they're experiencing. So listening and finding, authentic ways. And I think also not being too tight with it. When we try and box something in, because it makes a nice chart. The framework makes a really nice chart. And Scott and I have had some pretty funny conversations about it, because I insisted that the columns on the image of our framework be dotted lines between the ones that are lined up under head and heart and humanity, because it's really about the interconnection between all three of those. And you don't have one without the other. It's how do they function together? And so I guess it's about having clarity, but not being overly narrow in your approach. And it will feel different for different people in different ways. And that's key. So yeah, spreading the web, connecting, collaborating, and finding clarity within, I guess, the constellation of things that make well-being.
And for me, Laurie, just listening to both you and Scott share, I think for me, probably really important is the intentionality piece, is having an intentional focus.
Yeah, and being intentional and sticking with it, because in a school there's so many competing priorities, right? We're here to learn, but we can't just learn and then fail life. We need, so believing in it and championing the work of people who are doing really good things and letting that grow and stay with it. Yeah. And just keep doing it, because, the kids will tell you they need it and they want it.
Yeah. I'm just so warmed by the work that you're doing for your boys, and I know other boys' schools are doing similar work, and I really, this is a moment in time, as we said right up front, where boys really need this opportunity to engage with their inner selves, and it's so wonderful to hear what you're doing, Scott. I wonder if, in closing, you have any insights that you might be able to share with other school leaders about the intentional implementation of well-being programs.
Yeah, well, and look, our approach is one approach, and our approach, we've tried to be very intentional about aligning it, as I identified earlier, with our strategy, with our mission statement. So, as far as perhaps some insights, I would say that would be one of them. Just that as a school, when you are considering how you might approach well-being, and we use that term approach very intentionally, because we didn't want to, sort of buy a program off the shelf and then try to fit it within our school culture. Certainly we have we have aspects of our programming that involves outside providers and programming, from those organizations. But I really do think it needs to be something that is unique to each school's culture and whatnot. So, that would be one insight. I think a few others, as I mentioned at the start. It really needs to be fully incorporated into strategic directions of the school. I mean, I think, and resourced accordingly, as I mentioned. So, we were very fortunate, to have a leader and our principal fully committed to the value of well-being in our lives, and as such, you see it sit prominently, and I think it has to be that deeply rooted as part of your school's strategy. Just other pieces, PD for employees. We've done. I mentioned the mental health first aid for all of our employees. When we first launched, I guess about 3-4 years ago now, we also provided a full day of PD for all of our employees. We had Dr. Matthew White from the University of Adelaide come in and lead our employees in a full day session on well-being, which was invaluable. Measurement is key. We have surveyed our students year 6 through year 12 every year since we've started. Different surveys, and we're now landing on one that we hope to use for sort of a longitudinal study with students. But these are all pieces. I'd say as you're mapping it out, really try to stick to evidence-based and well-researched findings as well. I mean, we look to experts in the field like Martin Seligman and his theory of positive psychology, and Carol Dweck and growth mindset. So look to those experts. Develop great teams, work with other schools, and as Laurie said earlier, stick with it, because there are a lot of competing priorities, but we know how critical this one is, and how fundamental it really needs to be to the student experience at any school.
Well, I just wanted to add to the great points that Scott was making, that the school has done that is intentional, is timetable it. How your student walks through the day will declare, that if it's not in your timetable, if there isn't space made for this to happen, then it won't just necessarily occur, right? So that intentionality is put it in your day-to-day time. And the other thing that the school did really well, I think, is along the PD line, is take care of the employee well-being. And, just an interesting thing we did at the end of last year, coming off a really tough year. Toronto was in lockdown, and the kids were remote virtual learning for almost the entire year last year. And there was a lot of grief, and we knew that. And the school gave, a session around grief therapy to all the year 12s, because they were grieving the end of what should have been a whole bunch of rituals and rites of passage. And then to our grade 7s, because that's an end of time for them before they come to the upper school. And then they extended that same space, and it wasn't really professional development, but it was professional gift of shared grief. What has this year been for teachers, for people working in education in any capacity? And those kinds of experiences and offerings from the school just then resonate into a healthier community and culture. So those are really important too.
I love the way you ended that, Laurie. You mentioned healthy community and culture. And in listening to you and Scott just share so authentically about this program, and with such passion about the program that you are implementing, I think, that's the key takeaway for me is we need to work towards those healthy communities, the healthy cultures, and support our boys in whatever way we can. So I want to thank you both for your time. I know you're both very busy, but it's been wonderful for me to get some insights into Upper Canada College and the wonderful programs that you have in place to enhance the well-being of your boys. So thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruce.
And thank you, Bruce. And I'll just, say that if listeners out there do want to connect with Laurie or me, we are more than happy to to speak and to share experiences and whatnot. We feel that is such a critical part of being an educational community. So please feel free to reach out if you'd like.
Sage advice from both Scott and Laurie. Again, I'm grateful for their contribution to our shared understanding of our support of boys, particularly in these times. In turn, IBSC is here to support you and your school as you serve the boys in your care. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Until next time, keep safe and well.